Well, hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. English-born Bill Kimber began his music career singing and playing rhythm guitar with the Couriers. Bill and the band moved from England to South Africa, where they achieved more popularity. In their time together, the band released a couple of albums and several singles. In the late 60s, in London, Bill was produced by Gus Dudgeon of David Bowie and Elton John fame. And Bill was heavily involved in the London music scene at the time. During the 70s, Bill switched to record producer and in the 80s worked as an A&R man for RCA Records in London. And in the 90s, he formed the first third-party distribution operation in the UK. Throughout that decade and into the new millennium, Bill has continued to represent and guide the careers of many musical artists. Mr. Kimber has a small film production company as well. Well, welcome, Bill.
Hi, how are you doing?
Thank you for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure.
Well, take us back to the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Notting Hill in London. Everybody knows that name now.
Yes.
But at the time, it was really sort of working class area. It wasn't the fashionable place it is today. I first got involved in the business in my mid-teens when I wanted to learn how to play guitar, and my dad, who saved up and bought me a guitar. And we had a little group of guys in Notting Hill who put together bands just to do gigs. And it's really quite interesting if you analyze the group of guys who were in that little team at the time. One of them went to work in France with Johnny Hallyday, who was the biggest pop star ever in France, as his bass player. Our bass player at the time was a gentleman called Dave Ambrose, who became the member of quite a few big acts in the late 60s, early 70s, and then became director of A&R for EMI Records in London and signed Duran Duran and one or two other major acts. There were two drummers involved, and one of the drummers went to America and formed a band. I think his name was Michael Fleetwood or something. He formed a band called Fleetwood Mac, and then I became.
I think we've heard his name before.
Yeah. And then I became director of A&R in London in the 80s, after having a sort of short production career in the 70s, working with people like the Bay City Rollers and other pop acts. But it was when you consider there were probably half a dozen of us in that little team, four of us ended up with decent careers in the music industry. So it was.
Yeah, that's right. Well, going back to your early childhood, do you recall hearing music in the household?
Oh yeah. My father was a huge fan of jazz primarily. He was a huge Ella Fitzgerald fan. So I grew up on a diet of really gorgeous, soulful, jazzy sounds, and it made me really interested in wanting to play, which is what I did when I was about 16. I used to go to school in Chelsea in London, and after school I would work in several clubs in the Earl's Court area of London, which was just down the road from the school, and then get home sometime around midnight. And I was 16 at the time. It was a huge experience. It was fabulous.
Well, was the guitar the first instrument you learned?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And vocals. I sang. I was a singer at that time. And then I met this guy came into the club one night, had an American accent, but he was a South African. He was a guy called Frank Fenter. He was actually an actor at that time. And he sat and listened to me. And then at the end of the gig, he came up to me and did the, you know, I'm going to make you a star line. And Frank actually, being a South African, took me with the band out to South Africa for a year. We had several hits, and he also fixed up for us for the last 3 months we were there. We starred in a movie, which was a huge experience. I had my 18th birthday on the film set, which, you know, was quite amazing. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, it was a film really based around the Monkees type approach, where you had this nutty English band going across the wilds of Africa, turning up in little villages, and doing playing a few tunes, and then it was crazy. It was just totally off the wall. But it was the film was actually made by the same crew who just come off making Zulu, which was a huge international movie.
Oh, Michael Caine.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was all virtually the same crew, and they just come from shooting a load of it. The film never got an international release, but it did go out in South Africa, and strangely enough, I had never seen it. And on my 60th birthday, my daughter came to the house, 8 o'clock in the morning, knocked on the door, and she said, "Happy birthday, Dad." And she got me a DVD of this movie that I'd made 40 years previous. And that night, my wife and I opened a nice bottle of wine and watched it. It was a surreal experience.
Surreal. Now, is that Africa Shakes?
Africa Shakes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't even know that a copy existed, and so she just did this for me. It was fabulous.
Oh, that would be something to watch. Go back and watch that after all that time. Wow.
Yeah, go on. And then we came back to the UK. I had a problem with my voice, and I was told to stop singing for a year. So we've got in a new singer in the band. We made a couple of records, but nothing happened with them. But at that time, we were introduced to a gentleman called Ian Ralphini, who produced the records that we did. Ian went on to become the man to set up the whole of the WEA operation for Europe. He worked with the Ertegun brothers and that whole team, and the WEA in Europe became absolutely huge.
Yes, it has. You're right.
And so it was, you know, I've worked with some absolutely lovely people over the years. Frank, when we came back to the UK, Frank Fenter got a job working for a small publishing company, and then became the first managing director, because he was close to Ian and the Erteguns. He became the first managing director for Atlantic Records in Europe. And he signed Led Zeppelin, King Crimson. He took the whole Stax operation over to Europe.
Yes.
And toured Europe with the Stax team. And in fact, a lot of the Stax artists, you know, Sam and Dave, Arthur Conley, Otis Redding, became much, much bigger in Europe than they were in America.
Originally, it was an all-black cast.
Yeah,
all black.
Yeah. And that was all thanks to Frank taking them over. And I got one wonderful little story when Frank was still managing me while he was at Atlantic, and I was in his office one afternoon. And in those days, we had no internet. There was no digital sending of tracks or anything like that. So your only reference was if you got an acetate delivered that you could put onto a turntable.
Right.
And we were sitting in his office one afternoon, and he had this acetate delivered from the States. And I can honestly say I was one of the first 2 people in the UK to listen to Aretha Franklin sing Respect.
Oh.
It was the acetate of Respect before the release. And it was a magical experience.
Well, that must have been, yes. Oh, wow, that would be something.
It really was, yeah.
Well, let me take you back to South Africa. I know you've seen this. You've seen
Yeah.
this. I'll put it up here again. The box set that I picked up.
Oh yes, yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
The the how do you pronounce that? The Tokoloshi?
Tokoloshi. Tokoloshi man.
Tokoloshi.
Yeah.
And what is
Yeah.
Tokoloshi?
I don't know. It's some sort of old native character, some sort of witchcraft character, I believe. And a South African artist, I think John Congus, who is probably on that collection.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
He wrote a song called Tokoloshi Man,
Right.
which was
Yes,
a huge hit internationally.
yes, he did.
Yeah.
He's actually in Austin. He lives in Austin, and his sons have a band called Congos that are pretty popular, down
Oh,
there.
has he?
So
Oh,
he's
right.
relocated.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually, I touched base with him about 18 months ago.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's
I must say, yeah, I must get back in touch. Yeah.
yes, he's still around. Well, I just wanted to mention, see if you remember these songs. I think what they put on these compilations a lot of times are like not the hits. They don't put the hits on here,
No.
or the real popular ones.
Yeah.
But a couple of tracks. You're featured quite a bit on here. There's
Oh, really?
six CDs on this.
Yeah.
When you gonna say? You remember that song? When you gonna say?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. Yeah. God, that was our first. Those were our first attempts at songwriting. Yeah.
Okay. That's one that I liked off of here. And then that's what I want is another
Oh
one.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. God, I gotta remember those tracks.
Going back in time a little bit here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Gosh.
well, let me ask you about the in that movie, Africa
Mm.
Shakes. You backed Sharon Tandy on several
Yep.
songs.
Yep. That's right. Yeah. Sharon. In fact, Sharon came back to the UK with us
Right.
when we came back to England, and she and Frank actually married.
That's right. Yes, that is right. And then she began singing with Fleur de Lis.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Gordon Haskell, who was the leader of the Fleur de Lis,
Yeah.
he was also in King Crimson in the early days.
Yes, right.
And he wrote a song which was my first solo single.
Mhm.
And I was on Polydor Records. Frank's office was in the Polydor building, and he couldn't sign me to Atlantic because I wasn't a black soul artist, really.
Right.
So he signed me to Polydor Records, and Gordon wrote this song. And one day Frank said, "We got to record this straight away." And Polydor had a studio in their building, and so he said, "We'll go in and do it this afternoon." And I said, "No, we can't. The studio's being used." So Frank threw out the Bee Gees
No.
so that we could do that song that
It's
afternoon.
really.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. They weren't big at that time, but they were the group who were working in the studio. And we recorded that song with the Fleur de Lis backing.
I wonder if Barry's forgiven him for doing that.
And strangely enough, the Polydor South Africa didn't want to release the single, but a South African artist, a guy called Billy Forrest.
Yes.
I was I went out on that record as William E. And Billy called himself Quentin E. Klopjagger.
Klopjagger, yes. That's
Klopjagger. For this song, and he recorded the song. It was a song called Lazy Life. And it stayed at #1 in South Africa, I believe, for about 6 weeks. Billy's version.
That was my next. You're reading my mind. That was my next question. In 1967.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the B-side was "Crazy How Love Slips Away."
Yeah, that I wrote that one. Yeah.
Yes, on Polydor, as you
Polydor,
mentioned. Yeah. I like "Crazy How Love Slips Away."
Lazy Life. Oh, Crazy How Love Slips Away.
Yeah, the one that you wrote. Yeah, it's a nice breezy kind of jazzy track.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the kinds of music that I really enjoy. It's that KLM library music. You know what I'm
Oh
talking
yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Nice,
Yeah.
gentle sort of AOR stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Real breezy, summery type. Yeah. So that was right up my alley,
Right.
listening to that too. William E. William E.
What do you mean?
Where did
Yeah.
that
Well,
come from?
my middle name is Edward, so my name is William E. Kimber. So we just decided to go out as William E.
Just William E. Okay.
And you know, Frank was married to Sharon, and strangely enough, it was that relationship. Sharon and I were very close, and she called me one day, and she said, in her inimitable voice, she said, "William," she said, "William, you must come over straight away, man." I said, "Why? What's up?" She said, "The most beautiful girls just moved into our flat, and I want you to meet her straight away." So I went over and
Uh,
I met my wife.
uh,
Um, yeah, from that moment on, we saw each other every day.
is that
And
right?
and I have to tell you that this year we will have been married for 58 years.
58 years. Well, congratulations.
Thank
Yes,
you.
to longevity. So
Yeah.
you owe that
I
meeting
owed that to
to
Sharon.
Sharon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Who sadly is no longer with us.
Right, right.
Yeah, we were underage at the time to get married, so we eloped to Scotland to get married.
Well, let me ask you this before we move on to
Yeah.
future events. Uh, while in South Africa, did you have any personal experience with apartheid yourself?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
We had a situation where we were touring, and I think in Cape Town, uh, there was no facility for black people to mix with white people in any way. And so we booked a theater and did a show specifically for black kids because we were pretty upset about the way it all worked, you know. And in fact, I've even got, I think I still have a couple of pictures of us. We visited Soweto as the band. We went and visited Soweto, and I think I've got a couple of pictures of me in the midst of loads of young black kids who were, you know, having a good time with us. So it was very difficult. It was particularly difficult in Johannesburg, but down in Durban and Cape Town, there was some integration going on even then.
Yeah.
So they weren't quite so bad, but it's very difficult environment to actually work in. And we were there was an overriding Afrikaans religious thing going on,
Mhm.
and we had long hair. I mean, the kind of hair you and I have now, that was considered long hair. And some of the elders in some of the towns we played in were telling kids not to go and see us because we were,
Don't,
you know, from the devil. Yeah.
didn't like that. Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
no.
No, no, stay away. Yeah, well, that's
Incredible.
interesting. You know who Robin Hogarth is? Are
Yes.
you familiar with? Okay. When you mentioned Soweto, you know, I did a
Yeah.
interview with him recently, and
Yeah.
he produced Soweto Gospel Choir. And
Right.
they garnered a couple of Grammys doing that. So
Yes.
yeah, he had some stories as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
bet he did.
that must have been really intense and scary moments uh,
Yeah.
during that. Well, going back to the William E.
Mhm.
Period, Parlophone liked what they heard and hooked you up with Paul Corda and Gus Dudgeon
Yes. Yeah.
to release like 3 singles.
Yeah. Paul Corder was the A&R guy at EMI, and
Mhm.
my people had managed to get me an exclusive on a Neil Diamond song, a song called Shiloh, and Paul Corder produced it and totally overproduced it.
Okay.
It was a song that didn't require a huge orchestra and a massive. It was a song that was quite intimate and needed just a band.
Yeah.
But Paul, being a young, intense new producer, felt he wanted to do everything to it, and that's when I moved over to Gus Dudgeon. Gus and I got on really well. He understood what I was all about, and we made a couple of really nice records. Nothing happened, unfortunately, but he taught me a lot. And in fact, there's one great story associated with Gus. We were making a track that we needed a string section for. And he said, "Oh God, my usual guy's not around. You know anybody who can do a string arrangement for us?" So I found a young guy who'd been working as a cellist with doing some work with the Bee Gees, and he said he could score for us. So I got him to write an arrangement for the string section. And when we got into the studio, he was too shy to conduct them. So I conducted the string section with his arrangement. He went on to become one of the most major string arrangements on records. And Gus got on really, really well with him. And following that session, they then worked on Elton John's albums. They worked on Space Oddity together with David Bowie. His name was Paul Buckmaster.
Yes, right.
And Paul Buckmaster became a legendary arranger.
Yeah.
Sadly, he's no longer with us either, or Gus. Gus sadly died in a car accident when he was very young.
Yes, that's right. I'd heard that too.
But
Yes.
it was a great experience. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with some fabulous people over the years.
Yeah. Well, what were the circumstances surrounding you moving into the business side of music?
Well, I wanted to produce. So in the 70s, I managed to set up a small production company. And I cut my teeth on the Bay City Rollers. I didn't produce their records, but what happened was that in those days, in order for something to be on British TV, the Musicians Union in England had created a really difficult situation where everything that went on TV had to be re-recorded. So it had to be a new recording for the TV performance.
Okay.
So the Bay City Rollers were the biggest thing on earth at the time. I mean, they had a coast-to-coast TV show in America. They'd conquered Japan, and they were the biggest act in England. And I was lucky enough, because my production partner at the time had done a lot of arrangements for them, to be asked to do all the production of all their TV tracks. So I became very, very close with the guys, and that led on to me being able to work with one or two other UK acts who were very successful. I did an album with Helen Shapiro. I worked with Hello, and from the production work that I did, I was then asked to go into RCA Records as an A&R man. The head of A&R at the time was a gentleman called Derek Everett, who had been very successful. He signed Herman's Hermits when he was at CBS. He'd signed a lot of hit acts, and he was a lovely, lovely man. And he called me one day. He said, "Look, I need somebody in the A&R department who knows actually how to make a record. The guys here are very good at listening, but they don't know how to put it all together. Would you consider coming in and working for me?" And so I did. I went in, and within a week, he called me into his office. He said, "Now I want you to go into your office, lock yourself away, because they're sending a new MD in from America, and he's going to clear the place. He's going to get rid of the entire promotion team, all the marketing guys. If you go and sit in your office, he won't even know you're there." right?
Really?
And I went through, and that was fine. And then the next guy that came in got rid of Derek.
Oh, okay.
And then the next guy that came in, all Americans coming in, was Don Ellis. And Don was a big American, you know, one of those really big, deep voiced American guys with a big beard. And he walked into the office, and on a Friday afternoon, he said, what are you doing over the weekend? I said, well, whatever you want me to do, boss. And he said, I'd like you to come into the office and play me what you're working on. So I went in and helped that he, on the weekend, he met my wife, and he fell in love with my wife. So he was, you know, that secured me the job for at least the next 3 weeks. And he listened to what I was doing, and he said, well, you know, he said, I have to be honest. He said, I've been told to come in here and get rid of the A&R department. But I like what I'm hearing. He said, so I'm going to give you time to develop some of this stuff. And always make sure you bring your wife along to the meetings. So it gave me some time, and I was incredibly lucky. I don't know if in America you know about the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yes, yes.
I had been working on several acts in the UK, and the Eurovision Song Contest was coming up. This was 1980, the end of 1980. And in the UK at that time, the Eurovision representative for the UK was chosen on television. It was narrowed down to 8 songs from the business, and then they were performed on television by the artists that were hoping to go to Eurovision. Well, I was offered 6 of the 8 because I was at RCA. I was offered 6 of the 8 finalists, and I chose a group called Bucks Fizz. Okay, and we walked away with I must tell you the story. On the day that the final was being shown on British television, it was also the same day that the BBC filmed the biggest pop TV show, Top of the Pops. It was a Wednesday afternoon. They used to film the show to go out on Thursday. On the Wednesday morning, the technical people at the BBC decided to go on strike.
Oh.
So I had an act going on to Top of the Pops for the first time, an act called Landscape, who were really quite amazing. You know,
I wanted to ask you about Landscape. Richard James Burgess.
They were one of those. They were actually, when I signed them, they were just a purely instrumental act. And we couldn't get arrested with anything on the radio. It had to be vocals. So I called the guys in one day and I said, look, guys, we do have a problem. You're the best musicians around, but I need you to go away and write something with a chant. I know none of you are singers, but if you have a chant in it, then it's a vocal. So they went away and they came back with this song called Einstein a Go-Go.
The Go-Go, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so we had a groundbreaking video for this song, because they were very much part of the new romantic movement. Mm-hmm. In fact, the drummer Richard Burgess produced the first Spandau Ballet album.
Right. Yes, he did.
Okay. And they were the guys who the electronic instrument business were using to try out loads of developments on the road. But anyway, so Landscape were going to be appearing live on Top of the Pops. Bucks Fizz were going to be appearing live at the BBC Theatre for the Eurovision final. Okay. We get halfway through the afternoon, and I think my whole life's gone, because I'm not going to have these 2 television appearances. So we get halfway through the afternoon, and the unions say, we won't keep the strike on for the Song for Europe contest because it's for the nation. And we're going to be on strike for live acts for Top of the Pops, but we're going to put videos on. Oh, so the videos can go on. So the Landscape video went out on the Thursday. Bucks Fizz absolutely walked away with the Song for Europe contest, so we became the Eurovision entry for the UK. And 4 weeks later, I had, in the UK chart, I had #1 with Bucks Fizz. I had #4 with a reggae record that I picked up out of the blue because I really fancied it. It was a song called Good Thing Going by an artist called Sugar Minott. And at #6, I had Landscape with Einstein A Go-Go. So I had 3 of the top 6 records.
3 of the top 6. Those are some feathers in your cap.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was an amazing week, man. And I got back with the Eurovision Song Contest was taking place in Ireland. And I got back from Ireland. And when I got back, there was a note on my desk to go and see Don. And I walked into his office and he had the whole senior management team in there with champagne to congratulate me on the Eurovision win, because we won Eurovision that year.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. My life at RCA became really, really good because I put something like in the next 2 years, I put something like 10 acts in the top 5.
Yes.
10
I wanted
different
to
acts.
mention Bucks Fizz. The first song I heard was Land of Make Believe.
Yeah.
Great song.
There's a great story behind that. That was written by the guy who produced them and who wrote the other hits, Andy Hill, and Peter Sinfield. You know that name?
Yes, he was King Crimson also, right?
King Crimson. Yeah, King Crimson. Yes, he's written huge songs for. They were a great songwriting team, and I had the 2 guys in my office, and I said, listen, guys, I've got a real problem on my hands. I want a really big Christmas record for Bucks Fizz, but the BBC won't play anything that's got Christmas in the title before about the 15th of December. So you've got no chance of getting to #1. So I want you to go away and write me a song that sounds like Christmas, but isn't Christmas.
Isn't.
And they came back with this incredible song, The Land of Make Believe. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is fantastic. It's just what I wanted. And while they were making it, it was quite funny because Andy called me from the studio. It was a Sunday afternoon. And my daughter was 10 years old at the time. My daughter, Abby, was 10 years old. And he said, Bill, would you mind coming over to the studio this afternoon with Abby? And I said, why? He said, well, I've got an idea to put a nursery rhyme on the end of the track. And I wondered if Abby could do it. So we went over to the studio and Abby put it on and they were really happy with it. So the little voice you hear at the end of the song
is your daughter?
My daughter Abby when she was 10. Yeah.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
Does she bug you about royalties nowadays?
No. I couldn't give anybody royalties. I was working for RCA at the time. Yeah.
Right.
But they do. The 3 of the guys from the original group still work as the Fizz.
Oh, as the Fizz. Okay.
And it's 43 years on, and they're still working on it.
They're still working together. Yes.
Yeah. And they've got a huge following. They've got a huge Bucks Fizz fan base.
Yes.
And I last year they were doing a concert fairly close to where Abby lives, and her friend, one of her friends, is the biggest Bucks Fizz fan in the world. When she found out it was Abby on that record, she nearly had a fit. And she always books to go to see their shows when they're touring. And she called me just before, about 2 weeks before the show, and she said, Bill, is there any way you can get in touch with Bucks Fizz and ask them if they'll give Abby a shout out on the show? Because The Land of Make Believe is the biggest song for all the Bucks Fizz fans.
Right.
And so I called Cheryl and I said, look, I don't know what you want to do. I said, but this friend of Abby's is called. And she said, oh, is Abby going to be there? I said, yes. She said, will she come up on stage and do the nursery rhyme? And so I said, well, they're going to be in a box. Why don't you just give her a mic? I'm sure she'll do it, but just give her a mic and she can do it from the box, And so they did a whole big deal of it. And Abby, my daughter, who's not in the business, was just blown away because at the show she became a huge celebrity, you know.
Because of her voice at
Yeah,
the end of the
yeah,
song.
yeah, yeah. It's fantastic.
That's
But yeah,
that is,
yeah. So I mean, Pete Sinfield and Andy wrote several of their big hits.
yeah.
And lovely, lovely man, Peter.
Yeah.
And Andy, of course. You know, Andy. They went on to write. They wrote what's Think Twice,
Yeah.
the Celine Dion
Yes.
worldwide #1.
Yes.
They wrote that together. And I was when I was at RCA, one of the things that happened was I complained to Don that RCA's publishing division was being run really badly. And Don at a certain point made me a director of the company. And at the end of the meeting, he said, and by the way, take this and do what you want to do with it. And he gave me the publishing company to deal with. So I fired the MD. And at that time, I was just coming up to the end of the first year of my contract with the Eurythmics.
Okay.
And we hadn't broken yet. We hadn't broken the act yet. They'd made the first album, In the Garden, which was their sort of transitional album from being the Tourists,
yeah,
developing their sound as the Eurythmics.
Yeah.
And Don, I'd already nearly got fired for allowing them to change the name to the Eurythmics because we had money invested in the Tourists. So Don said to me, "You've got to get rid of the act," because at that point I had an option to pick up, which meant I had to pay them in advance and pay for the new album.
Okay.
And we hadn't broken In the Garden. And I, politely said to Don, I can't swear on this, can I? I politely issued a 4-letter swear word to Don and said, no, I'm not getting rid of him. He said, well, you're going to have to do something to make the deal sweeter. He'd just given me the publishing company. So I had Annie and Dave in the office for 2 days with their lawyer and my business affairs guy. And I persuaded them to stay with me. And to make the deal sweeter for Don, I picked up the option for their recording and I signed their music publishing rights for RCA's publishing division. And then I gave them the advance, and then they went and made an album called Sweet Dreams.
And the rest is history. Yeah.
The rest was history. Yeah. But at that time, I'd taken over the publishing company, and I'd also signed an act. I just had a big hit with an act called Clannad. Clannad?
Yes, that's Enya's sister is in that.
That was it. Moya was was the singer in Clannad at the time, and we just had a huge hit with a song called "The Theme from Harry's Game."
Right, that's great.
And so I signed their publishing as well, and I also bought the small publishing company that Andy Hill was signed to. So I did 3 deals, and I decided I needed a really aggressive general manager, a young, aggressive general manager for the publishing company. And I found this young guy working for CBS Songs, who was a professional manager. So he was out there pounding the beat. He was out at gigs all the time. And I offered him the job. And he took it. Don was a bit wary about him because he said, he's going to be after your job in about 6 months. Are you sure you want to hire him? I said, that's great for me. That's perfect. That means he's the right man for the job. And he's now the most important man in music in the world. He's now called Sir Lucian Grange. Yes. And he's the head of Universal Worldwide.
Yes. Well, there's something to definitely be said there that you saw potential in all of these artists, at the time.
Yeah.
I've heard some of
an A&R. That's what it's about.
Yeah, I've heard some of the early Tourists material, and liked it. And I guess Annie and David just kind of outgrown that band.
Yeah, they
And
did. And
yeah,
it was the new romantic,
yeah,
the whole birth of the electronic music. And Dave's a production genius, and Annie's very one of the most special people in the world in terms of her voice, her songwriting approach.
yeah. We'll talk a little bit about, before we start the interview. You were talking about Bow Wow Wow and
Mm.
Malcolm McLaren was another
Oh yeah,
story.
that was a really good period then. They, shall I tell you about the fact that the EMI situation with them? Yeah,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
They had the band was called Bow Wow Wow, and they were managed by Malcolm McLaren. Now Malcolm had already been through the Sex Pistols saga, where the Sex Pistols were originally signed to EMI. They were fired by EMI. Then they moved to A&M, and A&M fired them within a week. Well, you had this other band called Bow Wow Wow. And Bow Wow Wow consisted of the several of the band members from Adam and the Ants,
Yes. Yep.
plus a young girl called Annabella Lewin, who was only 15 at the time. And they were dressed by Malcolm's girlfriend, the legendary lady who had the shop at the end of King's Road. And they were dressed wildly. They had a look that was completely unique, and they had a really unique approach to their music, the Burundi rhythms they were using and everything else. And they had fallen out with the marketing director at EMI. They were signed to EMI. And they'd gone into EMI's building in Manchester Square and completely trashed the marketing director's office. And so EMI dropped them.
Mhm.
I picked them up. And Malcolm and I got on like a house on fire. We were great mates. But he was difficult to handle. Malcolm, every conversation Malcolm had, he shouted. He wasn't shouting because he was angry or anything. That was just the way he conducted a meeting. And my staff in the A&R department, after I'd had my first couple of meetings with him, came up to me and said, "Are you okay?" I said, "What do you mean, okay?" "Well, Malcolm was shouting at you in there." And I laughed. Yeah, no, it's just the way he talks. And I'd been I'd signed them, and about a week or 2 weeks later, I went on holiday with my family and left people in the building dealing with Malcolm. When I got back from the trip, there were 2 post-it notes on my desk, one from the managing director, which just said, "Call me, McLaren," and the other one from the marketing director that said, "Bill, please call me McLaren." So I called the marketing director first. I said, what's the problem? He said, "You've got to do something about him. My staff are all scared to death of him. He came into the building for a couple of meetings and they're all frightened to death. I don't know what to do. Can you deal with it?" And I called Don and said, "What's the problem with McLaren?" He said, "Well, he's been terrifying the building. Can you do something about it?" So I called Malcolm and said, "Malcolm, what's going on?" "What do you mean, what's going on?" I said, "Well, apparently you've been terrifying everybody in the building. What are you doing?" He said, "I haven't been doing anything." He said, "I've had a couple of meetings with people, but all we've done is have meetings. I've been talking to them about the product." And so I said, "Look, you're just going to have to tone it down, man. You've got to work with these guys. You're going to have to tone it down." And it started to work, and I got the album made with the band, and I used two different producers, one who produced Duran Duran, and another one who's a young engineer who I'd been using for years in production, and I gave him his first production gig. Well, when it came to picking a single, there was one track on the album that I really loved and fancied as a single, but it was wrong. They had recorded it and not come in with the chorus until 2.5 minutes into the track. And I said,
Oh,
"This is no good. We're
yeah.
going to have to redo it." So I went back into the studio with them myself. with the producer who engineered the session. I did half a dozen edits, restructured the song, and did some more overdubs, and then mixed it. And that was the record that I scheduled to come out. So about a week after I'd scheduled it, Don came into my office with Malcolm behind him. And Don came up to me. I'm going to swear here. Is that going to be
Fine. That's fine.
No.
That's
He said, Bill, Malcolm doesn't want to put this fucking record out. And I said, well, that's tough. I said, Malcolm hadn't said anything at this point. He was just standing behind Don. I said, obviously Malcolm's not talking to me. Could you give him a message for me? He said, what's that? I said, tell him to fuck off. And Malcolm laughed. Malcolm laughed. And Don turned around to Malcolm. He said, look, Malcolm, Bill's got 3 records in the top 10 this week. I'm not going to tell him that he can't put it out. So the record's going out.
Yeah.
And so Malcolm went away. And about 3 weeks later, the record, I think, was at number 3 in the UK chart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Malcolm came back in. He shook me by the hand. He said, Bill, don't you ever listen to me again. He said, you do whatever you want to do, my friend.
Oh, that's great.
It was a really funny story.
That's a great story. Don't listen to him ever again.
Yeah. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Yeah. So,
but you know, the connection, you talked about the image with Bow Wow Wow and Adam and the Ants. It was that American Indian kind of imagery.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Mohican thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the Mohican, you know.
Yeah.
And Adam had on like the I mean, I know during our Revolutionary War there were Indians fighting for both sides, you know.
Yes.
But some of them would wear those the coats, you know.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
And then have the paint and all that. So that was you know, very striking.
He's quite a character, you know. Adam's a real character as well. I mean, he's a fantastic character.
I've heard stories, yes.
Yeah. I nearly managed him at one point, but but I just backed away at the last minute. It was just going to be too.
well, you mentioned Clannad. What did you see in their sound, in their Celtic?
Well, there was what happened was that they had done this this theme tune for a TV series, well, a 3-part TV serial about the IRA. It was from the novel Harry's Game.
Yeah.
And the head of music at Yorkshire TV came down to see me. He said, look, I've got this piece of music, which I think is fantastic, and I need to do a deal with somebody for it. And I heard it, and it was just so different from anything else that was out there in the marketplace. It was totally foreign. And I absolutely loved it. And so I did a deal with him on the spot for the single. We finished the paperwork, and it gave me an option to do an album with them afterwards. And it went out and just completely flew. And it was just, the public loved it. It was a really haunting sound.
Yes.
And then they eventually made a great album for me. They were the laziest band I ever met in my life. They lived in Dublin, and I gave them the album deal. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll come over in a couple of weeks to hear what you've got. So I go over, I get up at an ungodly hour in the morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, to get an early flight. I didn't want to stay in Dublin. I just wanted to go over for the day. So I went over to Dublin. The manager picked me up, and he started driving me around Dublin, giving me a sightseeing tour. And I said, David, I'm not here for a sightseeing tour. I said, where's the band? Well, I don't know. I said, well, you better find them fast. And they had nothing. I mean, they'd written nothing. Here they were. They had this chance to have this huge album. They'd written nothing. And they eventually in the afternoon, they played me a couple of ideas that they had. So what I did was I sent one of my team over to live in Dublin for the next 3 weeks, to get them up in the morning, to get them to the studio and get them to write. And sure enough, they turned out a fabulous album. You know, the original, the first album, I think it was called The Ring.
Yes.
And that was their first album. It was very successful. And then they moved on to writing a lot of stuff for movies. You
Right.
know, they wrote some stuff in The Last of the Mohicans. They did, and I think the theme from Harry's Game was used in, oh God, the film that Harrison Ford was in.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
You're right.
yeah,
It was.
Patriot Games.
Yes, Patriot Games.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. It was
Yes.
used in that. So they became big film writers, and the music's lived on.
Yeah. It's
Beautifully.
timeless. It is, and you know, they helped popularize the Celtic, you know,
Yes,
music.
they did. Yeah,
They
yeah,
really did, you know.
yeah.
Well, we'll talk about forming the Big Wave group in the 90s.
Oh yeah. What happened at RCA was we were so successful that Don Ellis was asked to move back to the States and take over the New York office, which he did. But it left me in a bit of a pickle because the man who took over, as soon as he took over, said to me, "Look, Bill, I know you've been really successful, but from now on, I'm making all your decisions for you." Which meant the usual thing in major record companies. He knew he wants to bring his own man in, and I left. Okay. While I was at RCA, we had an artist called Eddie Grant. I'm sure you know who Eddie Grant is.
Yes.
And he was managed by a man called Tony Calder.
Okay, right.
Now, Tony was a legend in the industry as a manager because he was Andrew Loog Oldham's partner in 1963 when they found and managed the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Tony and I got on like a house on fire, and we both wanted something to do. So we set up the Big Wave group. And we were the first third-party distribution operation, I believe, in the UK. There were a lot of small labels that needed help. They needed to know how to run their businesses, and they needed national distribution. And the big companies would not give small labels national distribution. So what we did was we bought the national distribution and the sales and distribution infrastructure from BMG and sold it on to small labels and became their sort of advisors. And what happened is fairly early on, this guy came to us with a single. It was a mega mix of a load of things, and he created a cartoon character to front it called Jive Bunny.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and so the first single went out as Jive Bunny and the Master Mixers, and it absolutely flew. Tony, when the guy came in, Tony said, "Are we really going to take this crap on?" And I said, "This could be enormous, Tony. Could be massive." And it was huge. It was #1 throughout Europe. This first single was #1 throughout Europe. We even had a hit in America with it. Who was it? An American label actually flew us out to do a deal for the album. Actually flew us out Concord, 3 of us, to talk the deal. Atco, was it? No, not Atco. Oh God, I can't remember what the label was, but yeah, it was #1 everywhere around the world, and we had 3 #1 singles off the bat, and then the guy who owned it wasn't really a record man. He was in the electronics business. So we parted company because by this time he thought he was the reason that he was having #1 records. It had nothing to do with Tony Calder and Bill Kimber stage managing the whole process. So their third #1 single was his last. because we parted company at that point. And we had a couple of big hits. We had a huge dance hit with a guy called Chad Jackson. Hear the Drummer Get Wicked was the song. And that was massive throughout Europe and the dance floors everywhere. Yeah, we had some very nice things while we were doing that, and we eventually got a bit tired of doing it. We both had a sabbatical, got out for a while, and then I got back involved with the business in the early 2000s. I started working with some financiers from the City of London on some tax packages, doing funding for artists, for various artists. And I did a Billy Ocean album, Natalie Imbruglia album, So Solid Crew, and some various different types of acts.
Let me ask you about Prefab Sprout with
Yeah.
Patty McAloon. They've always been one of my favorite bands. A great songwriter. Unfortunately, he had a detached retina, I believe, which kind of limited his, working in studios and that kind of thing. So he's kind of not in hiding, but he's just not doing anything. But what releases did you work?
It was during the period that I was working with the City guys. I did a deal with their manager to fund a new album from them. So it didn't do that well, that particular album. But you win some and you lose some.
Right.
I think it was a point in time where they weren't being terribly creative.
Right.
It wasn't, we just traded it on the name and hoped that it would work. Billy made a great album. Natalie made a lovely album. So Solid Crew was really good. Lovely to work. They're nutcases, villains, but lovely people to work with.
Well, did you enjoy your production work on the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra album?
Oh, I love working with the Royal Phil, man. Yeah, I absolutely love it. I originally, while I was at RCA, I was at Abbey Road Studios one day, and a guy called Don Reedman, I'm sure you know Don's name. Don used to put together special albums that he came up with ideas on. And Don was in the building and he said, Bill, come upstairs and listen. I want you to listen to something now. He said, I've made this album with the Royal Phil and Louis Clark. And he was working at KTEL at the time, and KTEL were about to put the album out. He said, but we don't put out singles, and I need somebody to license a single from me. So I listened to the track, and it was the first Hooked on Classics single. Okay. And I said, I'll take it. I'll put it out. Done deal. It's all over. Done deal. Went back to the office, and I said to Don Ellis, I've just bought a #1 single. He said, fuck off. I said, no, it's the #1 single. Listen to it. And that weekend, it was played on every radio show on Radio 1 because it was so unusual. It was such a special piece of product. And Don came to me after we'd had a huge hit with it, came to me, he said, I've got a bit of a problem. He said, KTEL America don't want to put the album out. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no, they don't want to put the album out. So I said, Don, I'll do a deal with you now for RCA New York. And so I did a deal. I paid him $100,000 advance to take the first Hooked on Classics album for RCA America. Mm-hmm. And the first album went out, and there were also options in the deal. The first album went out, sold 3 million copies.
Mm. Wow.
The second album went out, sold 2.25 million copies. And the third album went out and sold 1.75 million copies. So all in all, 7 million records. on that chance where Don said to me, our people won't put it out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So sometimes you just have to go with your gut feeling
Oh,
too.
I
Sure.
think you always have to go with your gut. As an A&R man, you have to go with your
Yeah.
gut.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, somebody else will jump in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody else, if it's good enough, somebody else will jump in. And and if you really want to help formulate something with an artist, you really must get stuck in.
Yeah. And it takes a little bit of pioneer spirit and
Yeah.
entrepreneurial
Takes,
vigor.
I think the most important thing is balls. It takes balls.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
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 Well, a couple of other things I wanted to ask you before we kind of wind down. Here it is. I want to hear about Alma Mater and Pope Benedict
Oh,
the
that
16th.
was really quite interesting. I
Yes,
was
yes.
as part of the sort of city thing.
Yeah.
We were working with a number of different people, and we were working with the classical division of Polygram in London. And they put a proposition to us. They said, look, we've got this package that we're putting together with a DVD and an album featuring the Vatican Choir and Pope Benedict. So we said, what do you mean featuring Pope Benedict? And they told us what the package was. So we said straight away, yeah, we'll raise the money to add to your budget on it. And it was wonderful, absolutely fantastic. It's the Vatican Choir singing and the Pope speaking over the Vatican Choir. And it was launched, believe it or not, it was launched in Westminster Abbey.
Oh,
So there we are in Westminster Abbey with the Vatican Choir singing live
uh-huh,
and Pope Benedict on the screen.
uh-huh,
It was the Abbey was packed with dignitaries. It was
uh-huh.
the most fabulous experience. Really the most fabulous experience.
Oh, that sounds like, my son is in choir all through high school and
Yeah.
before that, junior high. So was it 2 years ago they went to London on a school trip, and I don't remember. I'd have to ask him where they performed, but it was a church. I know it was a church with a youth choir over there too. So he said the
The choir
acoustics were
business has
so.
become very big in Europe,
It,
very big.
it may be that's the one, but he said the sound was so crystal clear, different from the auditorium that they perform
Oh
here,
yeah,
It
yeah.
was really, really
Oh, listen,
nice.
look, most classical recordings have been done over the years, have been done in churches,
Yeah, yeah,
because of the incredible sound
yeah.
because most classical things are recorded just with ambient miking.
Right.
I record when I work with the RPO, I've always broken it down section by section and had ambient miking.
Mhm.
I've recorded them in Studio 2 at Abbey Road, and because there are only at the time there were only 3 studios in London that could get a full symphony orchestra in, and a full symphony orchestra is 90 odd pieces, so the studio's got to be pretty huge to
Big
deal
for
with it.
that.
And I can't tell you the joy of standing in the middle of, because the Royal Philharmonic has three teams. They have their first team, who are the best players. They have a touring team, and they have normally a recording team. Well, I insisted each time I used the RPO, I insisted on using the first team. And boy, it makes such a difference. Makes such a difference. It's a wonderful thing, man, to record that.
It sounds like it. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of imagining myself being in your shoes. It's, just all that sound around you like that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's also the responsibility, because if you're going to use
Yeah.
the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra for a 3-hour session,
Yeah.
then you're spending between 10 and 20,000 pounds just for the session fees for that session.
Yeah.
So it's a hell of
And
a lot of responsibility.
it's not like having a 3 or 4 piece band. You're
No,
talking, yeah,
not at all, man.
everybody has to be on cue and
And you're dealing with, and if you're dealing with opera singers, I did an opera album with some young opera singers, and it was just magical to do. Absolutely magical.
Well, I did mention in the intro about you do have a film production company. Is that
Yes.
still in works?
Yes,
Still
I
there?
can't give out any. We're just reaching the point where we've just raised the funding for our first film, and it's going to be a music-based film. And it's going to blow everybody's brains out.
Okay. So that's something. That's something to, yeah.
So I'll come back and talk to you about it as soon as we start making it, and I'll tell you the characters because there are going to be some people in it who you will know.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that sounds good. That's something to look forward to. Definitely.
Yeah, it won't be long now. Won't be long.
Oh, all right. All right. Right around the corner. Well,
Yeah.
you did mention, did you want to plug or talk a little bit about your Australian
Oh,
talent that you're
yes,
working with?
I'm currently working. I've been working for a couple of years with an incredibly talented young lady from Australia. She's always been dreaming about being in music. And when I started working with her, she was it was about 3 years ago. She was 18. She's just turned 21. And she's turned into one of the finest young writer performers that I've ever met. We've put her together with some astounding writers in LA and in the UK who are at the forefront of their game. And every one of them wants to carry on working with her because she brings something very, very special. She's got a unique voice, and she's got a unique approach to her writing and presentation. So, I mean, I'll tell you her name, and if you want to take a look at her, she's online. She has videos up. She has a website. Her name is Holly Riva, HOLLYRIVA, Holly Riva. And she's definitely going places. There isn't anything. There are tracks. She's on Spotify. She's building her following on Spotify, on TikTok, on everything else at the moment. And these days, it's about building profile over a period of time rather than just coming in with a big hit, because that doesn't happen anymore, given the way that the business operates. So, but within this year, she will have a big hit. And she also will be starring in the first movie. So it's going to be
okay. All right. All right. So we know one of the characters.
You know one of the characters, but the other characters will blow everybody's brains out.
Okay, well,
they don't know her yet, but they'll know the others. They'll know the others.
All right. Well, Bill, anything else you're working on these days?
I just working on my dogs. I take them, feed them, and I take them out. And I've got so much on with the film and with Holly and with various other little bits and pieces that I'm involved in. That I should have retired by now. But you can't get it out of your blood, man. I mean, there is nothing that compares with having a piece of music that you've been instrumental in putting together,
right?
Having it come out of the studio and the final mastering taking place, and you sit down and take the most immense pleasure out of it.
Right.
Well, the way I described The Land of Make Believe when Andy and Pete brought it into me is how I like to feel about what I'm involved with, and it has to be special. And strangely enough, I did watch the video of The Land of Make Believe earlier today because I wanted to hear Abby's voice on the end of it, And I watched the video, and the video was one of those magical days. We shot it in a swimming pool with loads of extras and these sort of visions from one of the UK's leading video makers at the time. And it was just a wonderful day, a wonderful experience. But hey, listen, That's what I'm in it for. That's what I do.
That's right. It's a lifelong process,
Oh, it
and
is, man.
music's in your blood.
Yeah,
It's always there. It's always, yeah.
it is, man.
So, so
It is.
well, I want to thank you again, Bill, for doing this.
It's my
Really,
pleasure.
really
Great,
enjoyed it.
great to talk to you.
Yes, and we will let's keep in touch if we
We'll keep in
can.
touch. I'll come back to you when Holly has her first big hit,
Okay.
and I'll come back to you and let you know about the movie.
Okay. That sounds good. That sounds good. And
Great.
I'll be prepared for my brains to get blown out at that time.
Great.
What brains I still have. Right. Okay.
Great.
Okay,
All
Bill.
right, man. I'll see you
Have
again soon.
sure. Have a good rest of the weekend and
Thank
all the
you.
best to you. All right.
Thank you very much. Take
All
care.
right. All right, you
Cheers.
too.
Bye.